welcome to Puppet Camp, UK Island. It's sad we're not gathering in person, but I also am really appreciating some of the work that the Puppet team and all of you are doing and getting involved with virtual events right now, because it's not all that simple. So this is like watching old TV series on Netflix or something where the aspect ratios are wrong. These are actually some of the slides I found from that Puppet Camp I was referencing back when Puppet was Puppet Labs. And one of the slides really spoke to me. I was skimming through it and I thought this was something really interesting. This is in many ways has still been, I think, the vision behind Puppet. You know, we try and solve day two operations, which is complicated. You know, operations can be a complicated business for applications, infrastructure, and day two work is complicated. All of that ongoing maintenance and operational tasks you have to do. So I think we've delivered pretty well on this in terms of being able to actually reuse code. If you think about 10 years ago, this was the same Puppet Camp where Puppet modules were announced, where finally we had a composable, shareable unit that you could actually pass around to each other. And you look at the Forge now and all of the amazing work most of you have done, you know, people contributing to open source projects, Puppet building things in conjunction with the community. It's just fantastic to see how much reusable code there is. And I think you'll see that this sort of spirit and vision has really held true, particularly with some of our newest products, which I think we're trying to solve different problems, but we still have this vision, I think, of shareability and usability and being able to collaborate on difficult problems. So I'm not going to go into this too much, this slide, but I think there's a few things, because you're going to see some similar content later, but there's a few things I wanted to draw out here. There's a lot of talk about moving to cloud, and I think that it's important to have a little bit of nuance here, which is that I think what we're seeing is a lot of folks are adopting cloud native principles, whether that be on premise or in the cloud or in some kind of a hybrid world. Any organization of any size, you're going to have a certain complexity to your infrastructure and you're going to be using some cloud stuff and possibly some on-premise stuff. But what we're seeing is that folks are moving to this world of programmable APIs, self-service automation, all of these things that I think the public cloud providers have taught us can be really valuable in terms of improving feedback cycles and improving reliability. But we're seeing that you can use tools like Puppet tools, other tools in the ecosystem to bring that same kind of programmability and build self-service interfaces for all of your on-premise work, just as much as you can for sort of pure cloud, so to speak. One of the things I think that's been really interesting over this long journey with Puppet has been we've added a whole bunch of different modes for doing automation with. So, you know, traditional Puppet back then 10 years ago was entirely declarative, idempotent. You know, most people were working in the client server model with Puppet. But I think we've seen that as people's infrastructures become more fragmented and the problems have become more complicated, that you really need multiple kinds of ways of doing automation in order to be successful. And so if you look at, we've got task-based work, and this is with, you know, Puppet Bolt, which I think has taken off in a really amazing way. And I think it's been particularly interesting to see a bunch of folks who perhaps, you know, hadn't thought about using Puppet tools in different contexts have now found new kinds of problems they can solve using those sort of orchestration-oriented tasks. We've got the model-driven work that, you know, Puppet's always been great at. And that's, I think this has been, you know, the bread and butter of the Puppet community and the sort of work that we've all been collaborating around. I think we're also starting to see hybrid work that people are doing, where they're taking task-oriented modules. So you can see if you go to the Forge and you search for modules with tasks, you'll see people have classic types and providers inside Puppet, allowing them to do declarative model-based config management. But then they can also reuse those objects in more of an orchestration task-oriented sense. And those sort of workflows that people are doing around ensuring desired state on, you know, machines with an agent or without an agent, and then being able to tie those things together in a task-oriented workflow is actually proving to be really valuable. And we're seeing people start to cross the boundaries between just managing compute devices to managing other kinds of devices. I think what you're also starting to see, and hopefully I'm going to hint at some of this with the talk around Relay, for those of you who haven't seen it at relay.sh, is that we're also looking at event-driven systems. And so I think the evolution that we've been seeing has been that people who are starting out with Puppet in the last few years, and hopefully we've got a bunch of new users who I want to welcome to the community at the moment, they get started with tasks because it's a simpler mental model. They have immediate problems they can solve and they can get value really quickly. Then they start moving towards more of a model-driven approach, because it turns out being able to do things like continuous compliance, ensure desired state over time, have reporting on it, those things are incredibly valuable. And we know that that's a really great way to manage an awful lot of infrastructure. Then people start building out self-service interfaces on top of these things. And if you look at some of the work that we've done in Puppet Enterprise in the console and being able to execute tasks and task plans, we're seeing people replacing a lot of their heavyweight enterprise self-service catalogs with lightweight tasks that they can hand out to the rest of the organization. And I think this is another theme you'll see from a bunch of our products changes that we've made recently, has been that we're trying to build things into Puppet so that the experts inside an organization who are really great at doing infrastructure automation can help other people without necessarily having to use Puppet. They can build automation and build interfaces that other people inside the organization can consume to help get work done that they need to get done. But it's all still sort of generally operating at, human speed in many ways. A person tends to execute the task. With the model-driven work, we have Puppet running on a regular schedule. With the hybrid work, that tends to often be a person initiating these workflows. But as we're increasingly seeing that more and more tools out there have good APIs, they emit events, and being able to respond immediately to those events at computer speed and execute automation becomes really powerful. And I think we're going to see with Relay that it's really great in terms of being a force multiplier and a control fabric on top of a lot of your existing automation. So what have we had happen recently? So Puppet Enterprise 2019.8, the LTS just came out. And we have long-term support cycles and we have the short-term support cycles. A lot of the PE customers, particularly those you in enterprise environments where it may be slower to get software approved and you need a different pace of change in terms of your automation platform, are really big fans of the long-term support releases. So we've got a new upgrade and install process and a bunch of really great features. We can now manage patching of Windows and Linux machines from within PE, which I think is incredibly powerful. And this is another, I think, one of these tools where you're seeing that the operations teams or the DevOps teams or your cloud engineers, platform teams, whatever you call them, are using Puppet to build interfaces and allow other people inside the organization who have the context around when changes should be made to actually go and execute those changes. We've also got full support for running plans from the orchestrator, which is amazing. We only released Bolt in 2017, which really wasn't that long ago, even though time's been a bit weird for the last 6 months or so. This is really, really powerful. You can now build task plans with full workflows and control flow around all sorts of different actions, making use of existing Puppet content, and then give that to people as a self-service interface. And because of some of the changes we've made to the language, like having optional data typing inside the Puppet DSL, you can now give really accessible interfaces. It's not just always a text box someone types into, but for example, if you've created an enum with multiple options to select, say, which data center or workflow should run in, that just appears as a dropdown, which I'm actually really, really proud of. And I think as an organization, that work has become incredibly accessible to a lot of people. If you've got a whole bunch of environments and use Code Manager for deploying code, you can also now release new Puppet code to environments without catalog compilation being paused, which I think a lot of people were really looking for. We've also been making a whole bunch of changes throughout the look and feel of the console. So there's going to be some talk later on about continuous delivery for PE, but it's really gone through a whole bunch of evolution. It really started off as just a way to manage code deployments for Puppet, but we're moving it towards more of a dashboard for the rest of us. So for all of those people who are adjacent to the core operations team, being able to get value out of Puppet and drive those pipelines at their own pace. We've also been working on Puppet Remediate, for those of you who haven't seen that. And the goal there was that we've really started seeing, as people were using Puppet for managing compliance issues, that there was a really big problem in terms of a silo between the security teams and the operations teams. The security teams would run a scanner, build up a huge spreadsheet of vulnerabilities, and then mail that over or send it over to the operations team, who didn't always have a lot of the context around it. So what we're trying to do is, use automation, as we often say, about, to build an API and a social contract between the teams so that the work that the security teams are doing can be linked up with the operations team really easily. So if you go to puppet.com/blog, we have a whole bunch, much more detailed information in terms of the updates that we're making there. So one thing that I'm also really thrilled about is that not that long ago, we released a program open source Puppet support called Open Source Puppet Assist. And so even if you're not on the commercial version of Puppet Enterprise, you can sign up at this link and all open source users will get some content for free in the portal. But we also have the option of paid subscription services to get much more detailed support in terms of guidance, architectural advice, integrations, all sorts of things. So for those of you who are in the open source Puppet environment, you can actually engage us to come and help you with these deployments. So the big news, though, I think in the last week, I guess it was Relay. We launched that out into public beta. We've had a bunch of people inside the organization working on this for a while. We've seen various iterations of this through Lyra and Nebula and various different things you would have seen if you've been keeping up with the news. But now we've really, I think, really hit what the sort of mission and purpose of this application is. The goal here is event-driven automation. And I queued up some of this earlier. We're talking about how that having the need for your automation to be able to respond to events, whether you want to call that, self-healing infrastructure or adaptive infrastructure. It's really about taking events that are happening out there in the ecosystem, whether that's from your monitoring applications, from your Git code, commits, pull requests, various things like that. Those events then drive automation. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more, but I think what we were seeing is that just like in the early days of Puppet, a lot of the vision that Luke was going for, and a lot of us who were in that community at the time, we wanted to replace all of that custom shell scripting that folks were doing, and that wasn't particularly reusable, it wasn't shareable, and it was difficult for people to build upon each other's work. We're seeing the same thing out there with a lot of folks who are tying to other cloud providers. They're building custom automation to tie together parts of their tool chain, both the things with standard APIs and the things that don't. And we're seeing over and over again that this work has not been particularly shareable, composable, modular. It hasn't been the sort of thing that we can build upon each other's work. So this is how it works for those who haven't seen it. A lot of the tool chains everyone manages is really complicated. So we think that there's actually an awful lot of value in being able to link together these incoming actions with intelligent decision making that can actually respond automatically. So you have a workflow here in the middle that can execute all sorts of tasks that you can see here. So the goal here is we're really looking to build another system where those event-driven workflows are things that you can share. You can start creating components inside those things that someone else can make use of, and you can start building upon each other's workflows rather than organizations continuously reinventing the wheel over and over again. So what are some of the examples that we've got here? So here's one, Google Cloud Reaper. And, for a lot of you who are responsible for the budgets around cloud, this can be a big concern at scale. There's a huge amount of convenience that people have in terms of being able to just spin up infrastructure, but not everyone always remembers to turn it off. And so what we've got here is we can actually look for forgotten Google Cloud instances that don't manage a specified tagging scheme. So you can tell all the folks inside your org, if you tag things like this is when they will actually, this is how long they can actually live for. This means that it's a sanctioned use case. And if they don't match those tags, you can actually go and terminate those instances. So I think this is the sort of thing that you see as a really great building block that people can start actually using to respond to an event-driven system, or they can just go and run that on a schedule. Here's an example we've got here of continuously deploying Terraform changes on code commit. So it looks for merged pull requests in a GitHub repo and then triggers a Terraform run. And I think you're seeing more and more of this sort of thing happen as people are realizing that I have a bunch of automation here, I have a system over here that is the source of truth for when something should happen. And why can't I just actually glue those things together so that they can actually happen automatically and as quickly as possible? Here's an example here, which I guess is probably a little more classic. And in terms of your monitoring system, sends off an alarm. You can then go and cause actions to happen as a result of that. So you could go and create a ticket. You could start building out a lot of those processes, particularly around change management and incident response, where you could do things like, say, a particular security alert has gone off. You might want to change your software-defined networking rules. You might want to start archiving the machine off for forensics, starting up a new copy of the machine, reverting to a previous state, being able to create that sort of intelligent automation in response to events, we think is going to be really, really powerful. And this is one that I think that we've seen a bunch of organizations get into trouble with their S3 buckets. For example, improperly configured things accidentally have been opened up so that people who have access shouldn't have access to it. So we can go and have a workflow that runs on a schedule to identify any publicly writable S3 buckets. And so you can see you could start composing all of these things into really quite complicated workflows that solve problems and work really, really quickly. But you can see here's some of the use cases that we've done with Relay. So one of the things I think we've always been really good at with the Puppet community that I think we're all very keen on maintaining is bringing everyone along for the ride. And I know it can often be, if you're in a very traditional, slow, manual infrastructure space, you come to conference talks and you hear people talk about all this amazing stuff they're doing. Everyone's just at different points on the journey. And I think I really wanted to make sure that the folks who are just embarking on this journey recognize that we have a really warm, really welcoming and helpful community that I've always been really thankful for, and that people are happy to help each other. We're all at different stages on the curve. And honestly, I think I see very few organizations that live up to the sort of ideals of a purely automated cloud native infrastructure. Everyone's working out how we're going to go and change. And that's just going to keep, accelerating. The rate of change is continuing to accelerate. And I think we're really at the beginning of the journey for just how much more manageable operations for infrastructure in the cloud and on premise can really be. So with that, thank you very much.